There are many ways to create your very own color grade in DaVinci Resolve with no LUT, no plugin. In this video, we'll walk through a step-by-step workflow that transforms your footage into something that feels polished, filmic, and stylized. We'll explore multiple techniques with plenty of my original footage as examples, focusing on balancing, contrast, and color shaping. So by the end of this video, you will be able to develop your own color grading style and your own aesthetics, whether it's a clean look, tinted, or highly stylized. With that goal in mind, we can now build a solid grading approach, step by step. Once you've loaded your log footage into DaVinci Resolve, the first step is to take advantage of the wider color processing capabilities by converting your log footage. This workflow setup gives you much more flexibility for color correction and grading. If you want a deep dive into color space transform, I've already made a dedicated video on that. The link is in the description. Now, a beginner might look at this uncorrected footage and think, it looks flat. Let's crank up the saturation. But that is a huge mistake. If you follow the steps I'm about to show you, you can bring out rich and natural colors without even touching the saturation knob. The typical correction order goes exposure, contrast, white balance. And the reason is exposure adjustment defines the overall luminance of your image, and recover highlight or shadow details, a clean starting point for grading. Do not underestimate this very first step. As you can see here, the final result is drastically different with and without exposure adjustment. This step is also extremely crucial in making several shots of the same scene looking consistent. So how do you properly adjust exposure in DaVinci Resolve? For a DaVinci Wide Gamut color space pipeline, I highly recommend HDR color wheels. HDR wheels gives you cleaner, more targeted control over tonal zones. Global adjusts the overall exposure. Shadows and dark affect only the deep shadows. Light targets the middle range, is especially useful for protecting skin. Highlight and specular isolates the brightest areas and lets you preserve roll-off and details in skies or windows. But how do you know if your image is properly exposed? Pull up your waveform. This is your most accurate tool. Skin tones usually sit around 40 to 70 IRE. You want a healthy spread from dark to bright without clipping. You can also use a false color monitor. False color gives you a real-time exposure heat map. Green, gray, and salmon indicates properly exposed skin. This is especially helpful for checking key subjects like faces, smoothing out tonal zones, and recovering highlights and shadows. To bring out natural colors and give depth to your image, we have contrast. It also determines how the image feels. Does it look flat? Or does it feel grounded, dimensional, and alive? Contrast and pivots are very powerful when used in conjunction. Contrast increases separation between the darkest and brightest parts of the image, while pivot determines where that expansion happens. In Wide Gamut, the default pivot is 0.336. This is just a reference point for middle gray. In very simple terms, middle gray is the very center tone between absolute black and absolute white. But in the DaVinci Wide Gamut color space, this happens to be at 0.336. Since we have adjusted the exposure in the previous note, we can fiddle this a little bit but not too much. Just be aware not to make your shot look under or overexposed. As you can see, the colors are already coming out without boosting saturation. This is because proper contrast equals to better saturation. It brings out saturation in a way that feels rich and believable. Many beginners get it wrong by reaching for saturation first and trying to fix a flat lock image. But without contrast, saturation pushes color into unnatural zones. It looks plastic, and in Wide Gamut, it can even clip your color channels. To sum it up, good contrast separates tones clearly, improves color clarity, and reduces the need for artificial saturation. We can now move on to white balance, the process of neutralizing color temperature and tint. It ensures the colors in your image feel true to the scene's original lighting. We adjust white balance after exposure and contrast to avoid false corrections. Because if you white balance before fixing exposure, you might correct a color cast that isn't really there. In DaVinci Resolve, you have a variety of tools to achieve accurate white balance. Starting with the offset control. This is my preferred method. This tool shifts the entire image's color balance evenly. Use this to remove broad color casts. Use the RGB parade to align your highlights and neutrals across all three channels. Use the factoscope to check skin tone direction, making sure it falls naturally along the skin tone line. Your goal is to center the image's balance around the neutral axis. Or you can use the temperature and tint sliders. They are intuitive and familiar. They act more like a camera's white balance system. These sliders provide shifts between daylight and tungsten, or removing unwanted magenta and green casts. Resolve also offers a white balance picker, an eyedropper tool that lets you click on something you know should be neutral gray. If you have a neutral reference in the frame, like a gray card, white shirt, or neutral wall, use that as an anchor. Click with the white balance picker, then Resolve will adjust the image automatically. Once exposure, contrast, and white balance are dialed in, your image is now technically corrected. In fact, at this point, the shot could be delivered as is, without further grading. It might not be stylized, but it's clean, neutral, and accurate. Before we move on to the creative grading stage, there's often one more layer of refinement: secondary color adjustments. These are targeted and subtle tweaks to refine individual hues, adjust color relationships, or fix small imbalances that weren't obvious earlier. DaVinci Resolve happens to provide several simple, yet highly effective and intuitive color tools. Hue versus hue and hue versus saturation curves kind of explain themselves. You pick a specific hue and you remap it to another. Or you can control the intensity of specific colors. Most people know that. But there's one curve most beginners overlook: hue versus luminance. This tool doesn't just brighten or darken a color. It reshapes how that color feels. Here's why that matters. Color isn't just about hue and saturation. It's also affected by luminance or brightness. Bright colors often feel pastel or thin because they sit in a high luminance, low saturation zone. But when you lower the luminance of that hue without boosting saturation, you shift it into a deeper, denser part of the color. It feels richer and more refined. This is called subtractive saturation. Instead of forcing more color in, you're reducing excess brightness so the color stands out naturally. The result is vivid, elegant color that looks soft, not synthetic, perfect for a high-end cinematic feel. And it's especially effective in what I call the hero zone, the midtones where your subject lives. Our eyes are most sensitive to colors in these regions, so any adjustment here carries more visual weight. For example, darkening a warm tone in the midtones, say in skin or fabric, adds depth to the color. It can make it feel luxurious without even boosting saturation at all. And that brings us to my go-to color tool, Color Slice. This tool pre-divides the hue spectrum into targeted slices: reds, greens, blues, Scan, you have it. So you can adjust hue, saturation, and luminance from a single panel. It's faster than jumping around different curves. This keeps your workflow focused. Then there's Color Warper, which takes things even further. You get a 2D hue saturation grid, and you can grab and drag any point in real time. It's intuitive, visual, and very flexible. There's a catch though. Because it's so specific, if you don't carefully qualify your selection, you can easily push a color too far or break up harmony across the image. But look at this, all balanced, corrected, and refined. And here's the best part, we still haven't even touched the saturation knob. Everything you've done so far has built a base that feels polished and clean. And that means you're finally ready for the fun part. Creative grading. Coming up, I'm going to show you a combination that is highly flexible and customizable, so you can later create and develop your own style and aesthetics. Now that you have a clean base, we're going to first set the overall tone of your shot using a powerful tool called Chromatic Adaption Transform. Depending on your narrative, you can quickly and safely adapt your footage to a cooler or warmer white point to evoke a specific mood or time of day, but do so in a perceptually consistent manner. Basically, a chromatic adaptation transform is a mathematical conversion that makes colors look natural under different lights, just like your eyes do. Let's take a look at this example. This shot has been color corrected and neutralized. Now add a serial note after your secondary color adjustment note, if any, and then insert Chromatic Adaptation Transform from the effects library. You can keep the default CAT02 as your method. This model is quite perceptually accurate. The others are other mathematical models you can experiment with in your spare time. You can also keep standard illuminance in both source illuminance and target illuminance type. Now, what is the default illuminance D65? It is the standardized white point for the sRGB and Rec 709 color space, and it's correlated to the color temperature of approximately 6500 Kelvin. Pull down the menu, we will focus on the D series illuminance in this video. As you can see, we have D50, 55, 16, 65 to D75, with D50 being the warmest and D75 the coolest. This is how we can take advantage of this transform. If we define this shot as D65, then we can warm it up by converting the white point to D50. As you can see, the image is much warmer but in a natural manner. But of course, you can also make a subtle conversion by switching to a closer number like D60. So it really depends on your narrative, as I said just a moment ago. We can also reverse this conversion. If I define the source illuminance as D55, then going from D55 to D65 will make the shot cooler. And therefore, just this chromatic adaptation transform alone can already help you fast-track your creative grade by setting the mood. And this is how you can make a whole series of shots consistent in color temperature. For me, I like it subtle, so I'm just going to slightly warm it up by going from D65 to D55 for this shot. Now we can further stylize the visuals by using a technique called split toning. It is the technique of applying different color tints to the highlights and shadows of an image independently to creatively enhance the mood, atmosphere, and visual interest of an image. There are various excellent plugins and DCTLs designed for split toning out there. But in this tutorial, we're going to dive into DaVinci Resolve's built-in curve tool to show you exactly how this technique works. After the chromatic adaptation transform, if applied, add a serial note. First, we need to define the pivot points separating highlights and shadows. There's a free DCTL to help you pinpoint the default pivots for the DaVinci Wide Gamut color space. Go to Curve and select all channels, and add a pin to your pivot. You can always fiddle this up and down a little according to your narrative without under or overexposing your image, but for now, I'm sticking to the default pivot. Let me turn on the exponential RAM to better show you the principles of split toning and how it affects your image. Let's say we want to achieve that filmic look with warm highlights and cool shadows. Okay then, first switch to editable splines. Pull out your parade and watch what's going on. We can slightly pull down the high end for a softer roll-off. We can also do the same thing to the lower end. Let's quickly turn off this DCTL and see what it has done to your image. You can see that it's instantly softer. You can now adjust the white point, black point, and also the mid-tone contrast at the pivots here. Switch the DCTL back on, pull up the factor scope. Let's work some magic. For warmer highlights, select the red curve and pull it up. Then select the blue curve and pull it down. Use the green curve to adjust. So how much should I pull? Well, let me get back to you on that in a moment, but keep an eye on the factor scope for now. Go to the lower end, select the red curve and pull it down. Select the blue curve and pull it up. Use the green curve to adjust. If you take a look at the RAM, you can clearly see the so-called split toning. Let's see what it has done to the image. Now look at the before and after. The image is now stylized. We can further make some adjustments here. The shadow is a bit too tinted for my taste. If you look at the parade graph, blue is too lifted in the shadow range. So we pull down the blue curve a bit. Or you want the image to be slightly moodier. Select Y only, the luminosity curve, and just slightly pull it down, just a hair. Now look at the before and after. We can even double up the effect if you want to really stretch it out and push your grade. If it's too strong, we can pull it back. Go to one of the notes, go to key, and lower the key output gain to taste. Remember Chromatic Adaptation Transform? We can now combine that to our curve to evoke different moods. We can easily and safely warm it up or cool it down by using the adjustments I talked about earlier. So you can see now the possibilities are endless. You can make a very subtle adjustment or really push the grade by stretching the split toning. I will dedicate a standalone video on different styles, aesthetics, and color psychology in the future. In this video, we will focus on the basic principle techniques. Sometimes certain colors could become a bit too saturated after split toning. Instead of going back to the secondary color corrections, we can even out the overall saturation using a power curve called saturation versus saturation. This is a smarter way for an overall polish. It helps reduce overly saturated areas without affecting neutrals. It could also boost muted colors without pushing already vibrant ones. In this example, I just want to pull back the brown color just a hair. For a finishing touch, you can now add your favorite visual enhancers here for texturing. These include softening, glow, bloom, halation, sharpening, vignette, film grains, etc. But texturing alone is also another whole video in the future. But look, without LUT nor plugin, you can also create and develop your own color grade in DaVinci Resolve. Just remember, these are all options. You don't necessarily have to employ them all. If you don't think you need any secondary color adjustment or chromatic adaptation transform, then skip them. Check your forms and graphs to make sure nothing is unintentionally clipped. Before we go, let me quickly show you another popular look as a bonus. It's called bleach bypass. This is a filmic technique used to achieve a distinctive high contrast, desaturated aesthetic that conveys a sense of somber drama. After you output CST note, first create a serial note, and then create a layer note. Label the lower note as B and W. In the lower note, go to the RGB mixer, turn on monochrome to make it black and white. Then switch the composite mode of the layer mixer to overlay. Now the effect is very intense. Go back to the B and W note, go to key and lower the key output gain. Let's park at 0.3. Now you get that kind of desaturated, moody and grungy vibe. So that's all for this video. Leave your questions in the comments section below and I'll see you in the next video.